Alright, I feel like I've said this about 6 other times.
Approximately.
So welcome back to part 7 of the Player's Handbook, part of the Dungeons & Dragons Comprehensive 5th Edition review. This time we're going to be talking to you about ability scores, skills, the rest system, and downtime activities. This is only going to be downtime that's covered in the Player's Handbook. There are more in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So first up, we sort of already touched on it class-related, is ability scores and what they do.
I closed the page on them.
Yeah. Hard to find good help these days. So strength, as
Move stuff.
it allows you to, that determines your typical melee attack and damage with non-finesse weapons. It affects your carrying capacity, which I've never played in a game where carrying capacity has been calculated.
Mostly because, as a DM, that's a pain to add up.
I honestly would like to. I would like to play in a game where that's a thing, just because I think it would be interesting to be like, shit, I physically can't carry anymore, because it adds a new concept of like, what do we leave behind?
The scimitars. Leave the scimitars behind.
Don't leave the scimitars behind. They're worth like 25 gold, or like 12 gold. But anyway,
Yeah.
So that is one thing. It also affects your jump, like how far you can jump vertically and horizontally. So that's one of the things it does. And then it affects the only skill that affects it is athletics.
Yeah.
But before we do skills, I guess we'll just go through the ability scores by themselves, and then we'll come back and talk about the skills.
Yeah.
So,
do you want to talk about which classes need them?
yeah, I guess we can. I mean, we can, but it's sort of. I mean, it's sort of what you think. And we kind of talked about it already. But some classes, I mean, the way the system works, you can kind of have whatever you want and whatever stat you want. Obviously, you're going to be more beneficial if you're a class that focuses on strength and you use strength. Actually, the table at the beginning of the classes does a breakdown class, hit die, like what saves they get and what stats they need to use, and like a brief description. So that is pretty much strength. It doesn't really function on anything else. Maybe some other weird stuff like around swimming and things like that.
Swimming's in there. Grapples.
Lifting. So let's go to Dex.
Dex! Dex is one of the best, I would say one of the best skills to be proficient in, because a lot of things use a Dex save, which you would add your proficiency bonus to. It's for getting out of the way of stuff. You can, a lot of stuff, or a lot of weapons, finesse weapons, ranged weapons, use Dex to for your to hit and your damage.
Initiative.
Initiative is based on Dex. Your AC is based on Dex as long as you're not wearing heavy armor. Dex does a lot. It's a good thing to have.
Yeah. But again, it's a thing that you can trade off your heavy armor class. You may decide not to. I would probably recommend trying to not have a negative in your Dex because of the initiative.
Yes.
More than anything else.
Well, also there are a lot of spell saves are Dexed.
True.
Like breath weapons and fireball and stuff like that. So
True.
if those come up, you want to be able to get out of the way.
True. Or be a paladin and have bonuses to
Be
yourself.
plus 5 to everything within 30 feet of my face.
It's only 10.
Whatever.
That's why I asked you if we're going to 18, because at 18 it goes to 30.
Yeah, it's not. We're not going to 18. I got stuff to do.
Constitution is next. There are no skills or anything tied to Constitution. So the only thing Constitution determines is your health, your extra bonuses for your health, and concentration-based spells. Like if you're damaged and you need to try to see if you can hold the concentration on a spell, your Constitution comes into play there. And then obviously saves tied to Constitution are poison saves, any of that kind of stuff. So you want to do, what is this, Intelligence?
Intelligence. How do I... Intelligence is kind of useless.
It's useless.
It's kind of useless unless you're a wizard or an arcane trickster or an eldritch knight. They higher intelligence scores don't give you extra languages. There are no such thing as skill points, so they don't get you extra of those. It's the dump stat for a lot of classes. A lot of people use it as their dump stat.
Yep.
There are no intelligence saves.
There are some, like to get out of a maze.
Okay.
I know that's one.
So, they're limited intelligence saves.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of...
illusions.
Illusions? See through illusions?
Typically, seeing through illusions is intelligence.
Alright.
But in comparison to Dex, Constitution, and Wisdom saves,
Yeah.
you're not going to run into a whole lot.
And a bunch of the skills are tied, but we'll get into that later. So it's a skill. It's not really a skill. Next is wisdom. You could talk about wisdom.
Wisdom is pretty useful because wisdom determines your perception, which we'll get to in the skills, but it's basically the super skill of D&D 5th edition.
Yeah.
Wisdom covers your wisdom saves. Wisdom saves are big because wisdom saving spells are a lot of the ones that are mind control.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, while a high-level fireball that does a lot of damage based on a dex save is great, but taking control of the fighter and having him kill his own teammates is a lot better. Other than that, wisdom doesn't really function around anything else.
No.
So, there's a lot of wisdom saves. So.
Yeah.
And charisma.
And charisma. It's about how handsome you are.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I think there's one or two spells that have a charisma save.
There are a couple.
But charisma checks are a big thing. If you want to ever interact with NPCs.
Well, pretty much any of your role-playing interactions are going to be determined by charisma. Yeah. There are a couple of creatures that do have, like monsters that have saves based on charisma. There are also at least one monster that has a save based on intelligence, and it's terrifying if you fail because it inhabits your body and eats your brain.
Which that's fun.
But it's only if you're going to be in the Underdark, and then you encounter that. So
Don't go in the Underdark.
there's no reason to go there.
Never go to the Underdark.
It's not a good place to
Sorry
be.
for yelling.
So that was the ability scores in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just one thing to clarify is there's a difference between a save. There's 3 rolls that you do: ability checks, saves, and attack rolls. An attack roll is you roll a d20 and you add your whatever your ability score and your proficiency bonus, and that is against an AC.
Yes.
That's whether it's ranged attack, melee attack, or spell attack.
Yes.
A save is where you are either trying to force someone to make a save or trying to make one yourself, and that's to avoid something bad. If it's a trap, it's a dex save to avoid it. If it's a fireball or breath weapon, dex save to dodge. It's a constitution save to avoid poison. It's a wisdom save to avoid mind control, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So those are saves, or you're trying to do a spell and then the NPC or the enemy has to make a save to avoid or take half damage or whatever it is. And an ability check is, for lack of a better term, it's a skill check. I mean, technically things like initiative are considered an ability check, which is important for determining things that add things to ability checks.
Yeah.
So like a spell like guidance adds a d4 to an ability check, which would count for your initiative.
Yeah.
If you were able to somehow know that was going to happen, you could do that ahead of time. So that's something that you can do. So so that's just some clarification on that. So when we say ability check, for the most part, it means a skill check. We're going to talk about skills, like Sean mentioned. In this game, it's kind of a disappointment on my part, or not on my part, but in my mind rather, because your skills only get, your proficiency bonus only goes up to a maximum of 6, and that's at like 17th level or something like that. So that's the only way, really, that your skills get better.
Yeah.
It's based off your modifier plus your proficiency bonus. Your proficiency bonus is going to be max of 6, and if you have your stat at 20, then it's going to be 5. So the most you're ever going to have before you roll is 11. The only way you can get that higher is through things like expertise, or you can count on something like a rogue can just count on rolling a 10.
Yeah.
And then like a couple of spells can give you advantage and things like that, but you're never going to get that higher. So it's kind of shitty because you never will be like, you know, as you leveled up in old editions, you put more skill points in it to show that you're more skilled at performing or dodge rolling or whatever it was. And that's just not a thing anymore. It's simpler, which is nice.
Yeah.
But it's also, I guess, you know what, I'm sure if you didn't have it the other way before, you wouldn't miss it.
Like, for my last character in the previous edition, 3.5 that we played, I was a rogue, and I dumped all my points in a sleight of hand, so I could just pickpocket like a mofo. And it was high enough where most people just couldn't. I just take whatever I want. And here, you're maxing out sleight of hand at 11. So every roll counts. You need, like, you know, someone rolls a 20 and has no skill modifiers or anything. there's still a good chance that I'm going to fail and not be able to pick that pocket. So,
Right. Yeah, and that's this bounded accuracy system, and it comes. I mean, we can just touch on it real quick, but it also comes up in combat. It's the same thing for combat.
Yeah.
You're gonna have the most is 6 in your proficiency bonus, 5 on your ability score. So typically, the most you're gonna have, because when you roll an attack, a 1 is a failure.
Yeah.
So the most you're gonna have before you roll is with a 2 is a 13, and things have AC of 20, so or 22 or whatever it is. So at level 20. There's pretty much a 50% chance you're going to hit versus you're going to fail at a level as a level 20 character. So that's part of the system so that things don't get way out of league, and that's another reason why there isn't so many things to bump up your stats, items to buy, magic item rarity, and all that kind of stuff, because you don't necessarily need it. Like we were talking about before, a 16 in a stat is only a difference of +2 versus a 20.
Yep.
So. That we just mentioned it briefly. Rolling a 1 on a skill check or a save is not an automatic failure. It is just a 1.
Just add 1.
A 20 is not an automatic pass either. It is just a 20. So critical misses and critical fails are only based around combat now. I mean, chances are you roll a 20, you're most likely going to pass, and you roll a 1, you're probably going to fail.
Yeah, hopefully.
But that's how that goes. So skills. Strength dictates. The only skill that strength dictates is athletics.
Yep.
Athletics is more or less for your shoving ability. It pushes, like if you're going to try to knock somebody out of the way, you're going to try to grapple somebody, it's almost always an athletics check, and that's typically opposed by an athletics check or an acrobatics check.
Yeah.
So that is strength.
Yep. For dexterity, we have acrobatics, which is the more dexterous version of strength. I've seen a lot of things that would call for an athletics or acrobatics check save.
Right.
To try and get out of it. You got your sleight of hand and your stealth.
And those are pretty self-explanatory. They do what you think they do.
Nothing for Constitution. Oh, and initiative, I guess.
Right, yeah, we talked about that.
Then when we're Constitution, nothing. Intelligence, you have your Arcana, which one of the things that they did in this, they kind of got rid of all the specific knowledge nature. Knowledge, you can't have knowledge in kind of anything.
Yeah.
Which I feel like you could in the old games. Now there's just Arcana, History, Nature, Religion. Those are the only knowledges you can have. They're all intelligence-based. There's also Investigation, which is like the red-headed stepchild of Perception.
Yeah.
Where I don't really get it.
Yeah, it's a pretty big sticking point in a lot of the community. I've seen a lot of comments back and forth about what's what. To touch back on the nature thing, there was a lot of other things that they kind of lumped together. Like there was knowledge, the planes, and knowledge dungeoneering, and knowledge local, and all these other things that were part of the past, and they really took like plane knowledge and threw it into religion, and local knowledge and made it part of history. And like it's part of the overall reduction, like taking search, spot, and listen and making it a perception check. To just kind of condense things down to make things easier, so you're not. I mean, it wouldn't really have made much of a difference anyway because there's no skill points, but you could.
Yeah.
So, investigation, like you said, there's a big rift between perception and investigation. A lot of the times, the roles can say they either use perception or investigation, depending on that situation.
Mm-hmm.
The way I look at it is perception is when you're searching to try to find something. Investigation is when you're trying to put pieces together. So in my mind, everything that they do in the office in Law and Order is investigation.
Okay.
Because they're trying to we have all these crooks and we have all these pieces and what ties this all together.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're actually out on the street looking for somebody, that's perception.
Okay.
That's how I look at it.
I like it. We're in some of the pre-written campaigns. I've noticed that for specific things, like let's say you're looking for the one tile in the mosaic that doesn't look like the other ones. It requires a lower investigation check than it does perception check.
That makes sense.
Because you're investigating this mosaic to try and find the one thing that's not like the other, whereas perception, you're just kind of looking around, see what's different.
Yeah.
So that is one way you can use it in your game. It can't come in handy. It's alright.
Yeah, it's weird because sometimes investigation is to look for secret doors, But in my mind, I would think perception is for secret doors because you're looking to find something. You're not like trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And like in my mind, also from a previous edition, elves get proficiency in perception, and elves always used to have a thing to let them find secret doors.
Okay.
So that's like,
See, in my mind, it's like perception is you're looking around to see what you see, and investigation is you're looking for something,
I guess,
like a thing.
I mean, it's really
It's really up to interpretation. You read what it says. I'm not gonna do it because I don't know how, and you can tell for yourself.
so wisdom.
We're on to wisdom, animal handling.
Pretty self-
You handle it.
Yep.
Insight,
That's your sense motive of previous editions to determine if someone is lying.
medicine,
It's not a whole lot of purpose with healing spells, but it allows you to stabilize someone that's dying.
or diagnose an illness.
So if you could diagnose an illness versus cast,
Yeah.
detect a disease, detect poison. What else?
Perception,
When again, we kind of talked about that.
and survival.
Survival is your ability to kind of forage for food, which kind of can be negated with certain backgrounds, but it's also your tracking ability.
Yeah.
So,
And then we're on to charisma. One of the cool things I think they did in this version, you know what, I lied. One of the things I don't really like that they did in this version is they made persuasion and intimidation both charisma checks, where I feel like in previous editions, intimidation was a strength check.
I don't remember.
I might be thinking of Dragon Age, the video game.
I think it was charisma all the time.
I like my version better. Just because it makes kind of persuasion and intimidation kind of redundant. Like, they do the same thing.
So I think persuasion is better, honestly.
Yeah. Because you can use it, because it doesn't make someone necessarily unfriendly to you.
The way I always looked at it is persuasion is it's charisma in intimidation first is a force of personality
Yeah.
versus a smoothness of your personality.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at intimidation and persuasion both being that. But I think it's a flavor thing, but yeah, if you intimidate somebody, they have a negative opinion of you because you essentially browbeat them into giving you information.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you persuade somebody, you're like, hey buddy, maybe you just tell me what I want to know. And they're like, well, okay, sure. And like, there's no negative connotation to that. I mean, it's fun for the good cop, bad cop thing, but typically as far as mechanics go, good cop is better than bad cop.
Yeah, there's no circumstance in which... I don't know, that's kind of why I don't like it. There's no reason why you would pick not... Other than flavor of your character. There's no reason to pick intimidation over persuasion. That's why I like the idea, and the more I think about it, I think I'm referencing Dragon Age. But I like the idea that it was tied to a different stat. Like,
I think it was mentioned in 3.5 that you could try, like, if the situation called for it, you could try to talk to your DM about interposing strength for intimidation if you were trying to intimidate through physical force rather than through just like, do what I say, bitch.
or I'll get you. So yeah, that's... Whatever, that's just me. And also deception is charisma based, which makes sense.
It's your lying that's opposed by your insight from wisdom.
And performance.
So that's for your bards or your dancers or whatever your type of people that are... it doesn't have a whole lot of, real potential as far as I can see, other than like a couple of the background things, like if you're an entertainer, or you can do well on your performance checks, and like people will buy you drinks and pay for, like you'll be able to pay for your stay in an inn by your performance checks.
Yeah.
And that was it, right? Persuasion, and then...
I think so. Yep, that was all the skills. Was there anything else we wanted to talk about?
We wanted to talk about... We did the skills. We wanted to talk about the rest system.
Rest system!
There are two different kinds of rests, short rest and long rest. I like the concept of it. Short rest is an hour of basically just hanging out. No stressful things. You can still talk and do different kinds of things, but it doesn't affect it. And essentially, the purpose of this for a lot of people is because you get certain abilities back on a short rest. And you also have the opportunity to roll your hit dice on a short rest. So if you're a fighter, your hit die is a d10. And you can choose to roll your hit die on the short rest. So you roll the d10, and you add your charisma, or your constitution modifier, and you gain that many hit points back. If you're level 10, you have 10 hit dice, you can roll 10 d10 plus your constitution for each one, and gain that many hit point back. The problem is you only you gain half of the spent hit dice back on a long rest.
Yeah.
So in that instance, it would take you 3 or 4 days to get all of your, because it's half and then half and then so on, all the way through. The amount of spent hit dice you get back half on a long rest. But it's great because, you know, there's not a lot of situations where you're not going to be able to find an hour that, like, you can shore yourself up in, like, a dungeon room for an hour.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's not too many situations where that won't be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, yeah, you know what, we're going to take up that quest and we'll meet you guys out here in about an hour.
Yeah.
You got to go buy provisions. And whether that's a lie or not, you just take an hour and rest up.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of feats that allow you to get more health on that, and some bard stuff that lets you get more health. I don't know, I feel like it's something that if people aren't aware of, they don't take advantage of.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't think anybody in our group's ever done it aside from last time.
I think you're right.
So just be mindful of that. And then you want to talk about long rest?
Long rest, one of the cool differences between this and other versions is long rest isn't 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, it's 8 hours of chillaxing.
Yeah.
One of the things you get is like you said, half of your expended hit die back. You fully heal.
Yeah, all your health.
All your health. You get pretty much all of your skills and everything back, because there is nothing that you get back on a short rest that you don't also get back on a long rest.
Right.
Like, that wouldn't make sense. So you reset your character, get all your health back, get all your spells back, get all your abilities back. The only downside is you can't do more than one long rest in a 24-hour period.
Right.
So you can't, like, long rest, adventure for 6 hours, long rest. You don't get your stuff back.
The other part of it is it doesn't have to be sleep, like you said. You can just, like, chill in the middle of a day for 8 hours and get your shit back.
Yeah.
But now that's when your long rest is going to start, is going to be at whatever noon rather than 6 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if you get up at first light, you're going to have 6 hours where you're still, like...
Before you get your stuff.
The other part of it is, I think it actually says you can watch, stay on watch for no
For 2
more.
more.
For no more than 2 hours.
Yeah.
So there's actually almost no situation where you won't get a long rest. I'll stay up and take first watch and wait for 2 hours, and I'll wake you up and I'll go to sleep. But that's all still counting towards your ultimate 8.
Yep.
So like someone could be on watch if you got 4 people, you cover the entire night shift, and everybody gets their long rest, and there's somebody awake every time.
And elves can get the advantages of a long rest with a 4-hour trance.
Right. So you can be like, you know what? 2 people take first watch, and I'll be ready. At 4 hours, I'll be up and I'm fine.
Mm-hmm. So that's cool.
And they, same thing with elves. They can't benefit from that in more than once in 24 hours. So that's the rest system, I think.
Yeah. And then we got some downtime activities.
Right.
Which are okay.
The way downtime activities work is it's time in between your adventure. The way I theoretically am supposed to see this happen more often is in like a more league style of play. Right now in the Adventure League that I'm in, we're playing through Elemental Evil, so we're actually playing the pre-written story. There are certain stores get access to things like, I think it's Expeditions, where it is a weekly game that you play, and like it's a self-contained game that takes 3 hours, and at the end of the 3 hours it's done. And then when you start back the next week, you're on a new mission. And the DM might say at the end of that, you have 10 days of downtime in between. So you can bank up your downtime, and then choose to spend it all. And essentially you can use downtime to craft, if you want to craft items, if you have access to a crafting ability of some kind. You can use it, like if you get severely injured, you can use it to recover over that time period. If you have a ton of downtime and the gold associated with it, you can actually learn, I think, a new language or a skill proficiency, something like that. But it's like 250 gold in like 250 days or something like that. So obviously, that's not a thing that'll come up too often. What else is there?
Practicing a profession, crafting, researching, training, recuperating.
What's training?
Training is what you were talking about,
Oh,
where you have to find an instructor willing to teach you, and it lasts for 250 days and costs 1 gold per day. And that's where you gain new language or training with a specific set of tools.
So you can't learn skills that way, but you can. You could. That's another way you could get access to lockpicks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the downtime stuff listed in this book. There are expanded options in the Dungeon Master Guide.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's about it.
that's it for part 7.
Yeah.